Despite a record-breaking year for carjackings in the Twin Cities, right now you cannot find the term carjacking anywhere in the state's criminal code. They're often charged as robberies instead. But one Republican lawmaker wants to change that. State Senator Paul Gazelka is pushing a bill that would establish carjackings as a specific type of crime in Minnesota state law. Now, the measure would also create mandatory prison time for offenders, at least 2 years, depending upon the nature of the crime. It would also increase the maximum sentencing by an additional 5 years. Lawmakers debated the bill today in the Senate Judiciary and Public Safety Committee.
This is like the Wild West, and if we don't take control of this and have consequences that make a difference, I think the problem will only continue to grow.
And it's easy for us to sit here and say, everyone who does this act ought to go spend 2 years in the slammer without knowing anything about that individual person. So I just have a problem with that.
Now, the committee did not take any action on that measure today.
Tonight, the renewed push at the Minnesota Capitol to impose tougher penalties for carjacking crimes. The number of carjackings skyrocketed in recent years, and right now they're charged as robberies. But a state senator says that isn't tough enough. As Jay Coles reports, the thinking is that longer prison sentences could be a strong deterrent.
It was an attempted carjacking similar to the ones we're showing you here that forever changed the lives of a South Minneapolis family.
What happened to your wife and daughter?
So my wife had brought my daughter, my 6-year-old daughter and 6-year-old niece to Sunday school.
John says after Sunday school, the unimaginable happened in broad daylight.
Was letting my niece out of the car with my daughter still strapped in, and 2 men that were armed, dressed to conceal their identity, held a gun to my wife with my 6-year-old niece next to her and demanded her keys. They're trying to take my car that had my daughter in it. My wife was a hero. She fought off both of them.
John says they fled in another car and were not arrested. He says he then asked an officer what would happen if they're caught.
He said, in all reality, they're probably going to get set free again. He said, right now, carjacking is not a specific crime. And that blew me away. I had no idea that that wasn't a crime.
He decided to support stiffer penalties by making carjacking a standalone crime.
What happened to my wife and my 6-year-old daughter, 6-year-old niece should never happen to anybody. And if it does, they need to go away for a while.
Last year's omnibus crime bill introduced a provision for stiffer penalties for carjackings, but it never passed.
There's only one way to stop carjacking, and that's to have a penalty and enforcement mechanism to make it work.
State Senator Warren Limmer tells me he will introduce that bill next week.
We treat it as robbery. This bill would remove that portion. We would declare carjacking as a separate crime, and as a result, it needs a separate penalty.
Limmer says his bill would classify carjacking as a felony.
We think that there should be a mandatory minimum. You can categorize it either a 2-year term, 4-year, or 6-year, but with an added dimension of 5 extra years.
And there is some good news. Since the first of the year, carjackings in St. Paul have dropped from 9 to 3 compared to the same time last year. And in Minneapolis, they've dropped from 59 to 35. Still, Senator Limmer says the surge of recent years justifies tougher sentences.
Keep in mind, a carjacker is using violence. He's using a threat of violence. That escalates this crime into an entire new category.
And Senator Limmer says he and other Senate Republicans will introduce the bill next week as part of a more comprehensive public safety plan. Last year, neither side could agree to a compromise, and a public safety bill did not pass, Kevin.
Jay, any reaction from the DFL on this bill?
Kevin, DFL leaders won't comment until they see it in writing. I reached out to them, but they did point to their $300 million public safety bill, which they say uses a combination of accountability with prevention and intervention programs as better solutions, Kevin.
Well, tougher sentences might help as well.
We're going to see.
Yeah, okay. Jay Coles report.